this session. My name is Magdalena Ackerman. I work for the Society for International Development, and today I will be moderating this public briefing on the CSM's positioning vis-a-vis the CFS Policy Recommendations on agroecological and other innovative approaches. So again, warm welcome to everyone. Today's session will be divided into two sections. On the first part of the session, we will be presenting our positioning document, which you can also access on the CSM website. Whereas in the second part of the session, we will have a reflection on the importance of agroecology for the CFS, and also a space for questions and answers. As you might know, we as CSM have gone through an internal consultative process, an inclusive and transparent process to assess the final outcome of the policy recommendations on agroecological and other innovative approaches. This took us some time, but we felt it was important to devote adequate time to ensure that all constituencies and all sub-regions of the CSM would be participating in this assessment process. So today we gather to present this CSM positioning. And without further ado, I will present briefly the speakers of today. First of all, Perla Alvarez from Paraguay and co-coordinator of the Agroecology working group of the CSM will speak, followed by Miriency Gonzalez, connecting from Colombia, also co-coordinator of the Agroecology working group of the CSM. Then on the second section, Tyler Short from the US and Nadia Lambeck from Canada, both inside the coordination and facilitation team of the youth working group of the CSM, will be presenting some key priorities, while Hala Barakat, connecting from the women's working group of the CSM, will speak from the gender perspective. Having gone through these brief presentations of the speakers, I would then like to pass the floor to our first speaker today, Perla Alvarez, but I would also invite her to present herself a bit better and go ahead with her presentation. Perla Alvarez, over to you. Thank you.
Buenos días, buenas tardes.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm sure that somewhere that is the evening time already. It's a pleasure to be able to share with you today this public briefing of the Civil Society Indigenous Peoples Mechanism. My name is Perla Alvarez. I am from Paraguay. My organization is part of the Via Campesina, and we're part of the Continental Alliance for Food Sovereignty for the Americas region and the Caribbean. And we are part of this articulation, which is the CSM. I'm going to try to briefly summarize the aspects that after the internal consultation from June until now in the CSM with all of its members, we are presenting a document in which we present our position, both with regard to the adopted document on agroecological and other innovative approaches, but not only with regard to the adopted document in itself, but also relating to the discussion process on this document. Firstly, we would like to say that we, as part of civil society, organizations, movements, Indigenous peoples that make up this space, we assume our commitment to participate, and we reaffirm this commitment to support the mandate of the CFS. And we have actively participated in the full process of drawing up these recommendations on agroecological and other innovative approaches. This document was adopted in June by the member states in the 48th session. For us, mainly for those of us who make up grassroots organizations, those of us who are on the ground from Indigenous peoples, but also peasant movements and just everyone, our day-to-day activities, our vision of the world, our daily work has at its heart agroecology. It is part of the way in which we understand a fair world in which our human rights are realized individually and as collectives. That is why we have made great efforts to participate in the process for this document, and we have also given our perspectives, hoping that the recommendations would be able to advance our rights, especially with regard to peasants' rights and Indigenous peoples' rights, but also the right to food for those of us who live in the field, but for all parts of the populations, including cities. We believe that we could contribute in this regard to this document, and therefore we have endeavored, we have invested time, we have reflected, political discussions have been held, and we would like to thank also for the opportunity to have prior documents. For example, the document on food systems and nutrition. There was a significant change with regard to the fact that the chair allowed negotiations and more inclusive conversations. However, we would like to highlight that time constraints that were quite significant throughout the process in which we undertook these conversations. And this was as a result of the pre-summit and the Summit on Food Systems of the United Nations. Therefore, we would think that that significantly limited our ability to hold a deeper, more serious debate that gave us significant or sufficient time to reach satisfactory consensuses for all, and especially we have taken this on as a starting point, and that is realization of human rights and protection of the environment as a fundamental issue in these times of climate change, because they are altering not only the environment and as a result our health, but we are also jeopardizing the future of humanity and the planet. Therefore, we believe that time constraints was an issue. Another limitation that we noted, despite the willingness of the chair and the working group for these negotiations, we believe that the virtual modality due to the pandemic imposed by the lockdown that resulted from the pandemic has also been a limiting factor, not just for us who are part of grassroots organizations. We have our own limitations in our regions as a result of connectivity. But it's also been difficult for a number of countries that also suffer issues regarding connectivity, and other delegations that were overworked and also as a result of working in different time zones and haven't been able to properly engage in that regard. Furthermore, we would also like to highlight that in terms of the document itself, there are very important considerations for us. Fundamentally, this has been included in the preamble. Some of them were included in the recommendations, but not enough, not as much as we would have liked it to. But we do note that there are contributions that have made it into the preamble. Important elements, such as recognition of the 10 elements of the FAO, the 13 principles of the HLPE report. These are included. However, there are a number of caveats in the language. And we would like to draw attention to this. We think that this pressure on national resources or natural resources should be reduced, because it really is starting to affect, for example, the environment, and this is making it difficult to support natural and human health, but it's also jeopardizing our future. Furthermore, we would like to say that the document that was adopted does not put in the center that it is based on human rights realization. This has been an ongoing struggle throughout the negotiation process to make this to be considered the starting point. So we would like to draw attention to that point. It doesn't assign a central role to agroecology, nor does it acknowledge its fundamental role, its transformative role. We believe that recognizing agroecology as a necessary approach for transforming food systems is important. However, putting it on an equal footing with unsustainable systems is something that we believe is a paradox, and it's difficult to understand this in the document. Furthermore, there are imbalances with these approaches. It does not recognize the economic, social, and environmental impacts of food systems that are mainly industrial. It doesn't recognize the imbalance of power there are between different food systems. It doesn't recognize sufficiently indigenous and ancestral knowledge of our peoples, of the peasant and indigenous peoples, who historically have used methodologies, technologies that were appropriate and did not damage the environment, and as a result would have been important to have included. Furthermore, this document also includes aspects that are antagonists to agroecology, such as the use of agrotoxics. And this is inconsistent with a number of documents already approved by the UN. And it seems that we are going backwards in certain aspects. Therefore, we believe that we should draw attention to this, to our governments, to the CFS, the members, and to the full UN system. We believe that this is almost in support of industrial food systems who are being able to influence in the different multinational levels. And we want to reaffirm that this is a real risk. We've mentioned this with regard to the prior document on food security and nutrition, but we've also done this in this process. And we believe that this was very important to note in all of these processes, including in the Summit on Food Systems. I wanted to highlight a number of aspects with regard to the content. This does not focus on the realization of human rights. We believe that we have international instruments that must be used for all of these documents. We said that this is a weakness to talk about recommendations and not talk about a more normative approach. However, at least the documents that are adopted by the General Assembly of the UN or other UN bodies must be in line with this. However, there was a rejection by a number of governments to include in the recommendations, for example, references to UNDROP, UNDRIP, things that we believe are very important, even in articles from CEDAW on the rights of rural women. We think that it is incredible that in the middle of the 21st century, these rights are not included in these documents, especially when it comes to inequalities that we know exist. These are structural inequalities that affect people on the ground when it comes to realizing their rights to land, to food, to a healthy environment, the right to health, women and girls' rights. Therefore, this is an aspect that we feel very strongly about. It doesn't assign a central role to agroecology, as we said, and also recognizes agroecology as if it was the same or equal to other types of unsustainable approaches. But this should not be the case. There is inequality, and currently some of these aspects are being emphasized. I'm going to quickly wrap this up in a couple of minutes now. These aspects are worth mentioning. Furthermore, the insufficient diversity of motivation for youth to be much more interested and being able to live in the fields. In fact, young people are being expelled from the fields. And in fact, this aging population in the fields is actually jeopardizing future food production. Also, with regard to generating employment for youth, when agroecology is not in the center, this is a problem. Agroecology could motivate people to get more involved. Furthermore, we also understand that in this document, in these recommendations, there is not sufficient orientation towards eliminating marginalization. Even during the negotiation progress, the word itself was rejected by a number of governments. But why can we not mention the word marginalization if that is the truth? Therefore, particularly social marginalization of women, girls, and youth, and many of the indigenous peoples find themselves in this situation. Therefore, we said that these elements must also have recognized these aspects, but also the traditional knowledge. But it's actually avoided mentioning the fact that there is massive deaths in indigenous communities as a result of COVID. Therefore, there must be greater recognition in documents like this. And finally, to wrap this up, the issue of recognizing the importance of agroecology, but also creating entry points to other approaches which clearly violate collective rights, such as the right to a healthy environment, the right to health, the use of agrotoxics, for example, including pesticides and other chemical products which affect negatively our health. And we're not just talking about plants, we're talking about all aspects of diversity. This document is already on the social networks, and we hope that those who are joining us today, that we can disseminate this document, and this will serve to raise awareness to the decision makers and those who will do so in the future, and in terms of specific acts in certain countries. And we want to move forward and not move back with these recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Perla. Thank you for going through the CSM's positioning document. Telling us from your experience as a food producer yourself. Now, moving on with our agenda, I would like to pass the floor to Miriency Gonzalez so she can complement Perla's presentation. Miriency, can you hear us? Miriency was having some connection issues, so I don't know if she's able to hear us. If not, I would then suggest to continue with the agenda and then maybe try with Miriency at a later stage, so we don't get so much delay. Miriency is saying that her microphone and camera are not enabled. Maybe we can check this technical issue and then we come back to Miriency. So now I would like to pass the floor to then Tyler Short. Perla was already mentioning the importance of agroecology, so I would now let the floor to Tyler so he can further explain this perspective. Tyler, please go ahead.
Thank you, Magdalena. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm one of the coordinators for the CSM Youth, and I'm a small-scale food producer organized in the international peasant movement La Via Campesina. We would like to mention the importance of agroecology for the current CFS policy process titled Promoting Youth Engagement and Employment in Agriculture and Food Systems. Although the youth in the CSM are deeply concerned about these recommendations on agroecological and other innovative approaches, we sincerely believe that the CFS negotiations regarding youth can result in policy recommendations that not only make sense, but more importantly, recommendations that truly respond to the social, political, economic, ecological, and health crises of today. Though this is going to require ambition, political will that goes far beyond the SDGs and other forms of agreed language for the CFS. The policy recommendations on agroecological and other innovative approaches refer to women, youth, Indigenous peoples, and local communities as people in vulnerable situations. But what does this really even mean, to be in a vulnerable situation? Throughout the negotiations, the CSM proposed more precise terms, such as marginalized and oppressed, to replace or add to this notion of vulnerability. And we've argued that historical perspectives are needed to identify and eliminate the conditions, policies, and actions that have structurally forced people into vulnerable situations. In other words, the CFS should not simply promote good policies and responsible governance. States, corporations, and other non-state actors must stop violating our rights with impunity. In the recommendations, one full paragraph is focused specifically on youth. Recommendation 3.0 is about fostering transitions to resilient and diversified food systems. And it invites the creation of an enabling environment for young people to remain in or move to rural areas. This is presently a major topic within the CFS negotiations on youth. The CFS negotiated extensively on this paragraph, and we achieved a significant addition to the text. Our language was included first and foremost about protecting the rights and the livelihoods of young people. However, the CFS must also acknowledge that agroecological transitions depend on redistributive policies at all levels. The rights, agency, and diversity of young peasants and other youth working in rural and urban areas must be recognized to ensure equity and democratic control over productive resources, such as land, water, and seeds, especially through comprehensive and genuine agrarian reform. Agroecology is a holistic pathway for social and ecological transformation, a vehicle for a just transition toward economies of well-being defined by food sovereignty, dignified livelihoods, and healthy environments. And when we say transition, we don't mean transition with 4.5 caveats. Adding in a coherent manner, as appropriate, and in accordance with and dependent on national context and capacities to any reference of transition avoids the fact that food systems transformation is urgently necessary. The extractive economy is unsustainable, and peasant agroecology is incompatible with the unjust model of industrial agribusiness. For youth in the CSM, agroecology necessarily involves building solidarity and autonomy, fighting against patriarchy, and defending sexual and gender diversities. Communitarian values that reject all forms of domination, subjugation, and exploitation. Strengthening mutual aid networks and smallholder markets. Defending and increasing biodiversity, especially peasant and indigenous seeds. Protecting cultural diversity, including traditional foodways and local knowledge. The recovery of ancestral wisdom and the application of ecological principles to food systems through a horizontal dialogue of different knowledges and different ways of knowing. Repairing the harms and the injustices caused through colonialism and neocolonialism. Transparent, accountable, and inclusive governance mechanisms for participatory democracy. And the enhancement of resilience of our communities and ecosystems facing the worsening effects of climate chaos. Agroecology is a real solution to feed the world and cool the planet. And there's no future without food sovereignty. Now is the time to transform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tyler, for bringing in the youth voice into the whole process, but also today in sharing our positioning. Now I would like to pass the floor to Nadia Lambeck, also from the CSM Youth Working Group. Nadia, please go ahead.
Thank you, Maggie. And good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. My name is Nadia Lambeck, and I'm one of the facilitators of the CSM Youth Working Group. I'm a lawyer, a student, and a professor in Canada. I'll speak today about the lessons we can and must learn from the agroecology negotiation process for the ongoing processes on gender equality and women and girls empowerment, and on promoting youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems. As my comrade Tyler so eloquently pointed out, we at the CSM are committed to our struggles and to the CSF as an institution and space where we can meaningfully engage and work together with states and other actors to achieve the necessary changes we need in our food systems. But the agroecology process was fraught with mistakes that we cannot afford to repeat in these ongoing processes as well as future ones. First, we need ambition, we need imagination, and we need drive to transform our food systems to build economies of well-being and to address the underlying causes of the many crises we face today. Negotiations that rely primarily on agreed upon language will not be ambitious, will lack imagination, and will do little to provide guidance to countries on how to transform their food systems, address gender inequities, ensure women's empowerments and rights, or meaningfully engage with youth and future generations in our food systems. The agroecology negotiations were stymied by states who refused to move beyond a narrow set of agreed language. By narrow, I mean that states regularly insisted that we rely on language from documents agreed to at meetings and forums where we as civil society were not invited to participate, like FAO Council documents, and at the same time refused adamantly to rely on agreed language from internationally agreed human rights instruments. This is not a sustainable or just way to negotiate instruments here at the CFS. It's also completely unproductive. If we want to change, if we want to realize the right to food, if we want our work to be meaningful, we cannot just rely on a green language. This brings me to my second point, and a point already raised by my colleagues. There has been a deeply worrisome trend, very present in the agroecology process, but others as well, here at the CFS, of not only ignoring, but outright undercutting human rights in CFS negotiated instruments. This is unacceptable. It's absurd, and it's disturbing that we're still having this fight. During the youth process and the women's process, we will not waste any more time debating basic principles of international law and human rights with states. UNDROP is international human rights law. It's a declaration. It may not be binding, but it's part of the corpus and set of norms that make up international human rights law. The US and Australia may have lost the vote, but UNDROP is international human rights law. Peasants' rights are human rights. The rights of those working in rural areas are human rights. The right not to be exposed to dangerous pesticides is a human right, and women's rights are human rights. Will not stand by processes that are not grounded in human rights. Third, during the agroecology process, we saw the HLPE repeatedly undercut by states. When the CFS reformed, the HLPE was given a central role in the CFS processes, and rightly so. The HLPE reports are meant to be the basis and ground of our negotiation process. They provide us with shared understandings and a basis for our collective work. They bring together scientific knowledge and expertise from different areas, and they are the basis for our work. We will not stand for any more undermining of the HLPE in negotiation processes. And finally, as my colleagues have mentioned, the agroecology negotiation process faced many procedural challenges, particularly related to rights of participation. Access to the negotiations was often an issue for us at the CSM, but also for Global South countries. We had sessions at times that meant folks couldn't join. Many of us joined repeatedly at 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. Some stayed up till 3 a.m. To finish the negotiations. Many faced connectivity issues. There were language challenges, sessions only in English, text shared only in English, and the negotiation text on the screen was always in English. We can remedy these easily if we want, but we need adequate time. So for the youth process, we know already that 5 days is not enough. Why not schedule a decent number of days that will allow us to do our work in a just and fair manner? We can also translate documents in sessions. We know how to do that. Why not do that for all documents and all sessions? We also speak often about innovation. Why not use innovation to figure out ways to ensure language justice, to have negotiated documents up on the screen in multiple languages at once? Surely this is possible. And finally, as the world opens up, we need to think deeply about the impacts of COVID-19 and the vaccine apartheid on participation in the CFS. Online processes certainly had their challenges, but if we move too quickly to in-person negotiations without addressing who will be able to travel to Rome, we will create a two-tier system that excludes those most important to our work. So finally, we're here today, members of the Youth Working Group, the Women's Working Group, and other participants in the CSM, because this work and our struggles matter to us, because the CFS continues to be a place where we can work together with others, and a place of great importance to us. But we need to ensure that processes are fair. We need to not commit the same mistakes of the past if we are to build and work together towards transforming our food systems, to meeting human rights, and to facing the challenges ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadia, for bringing in some important lessons learned for the future of the CFS. I would like now to try again with Miriensi, as I see she has connected again. Miriensi, can you hear us?
Perfectamente bien.
Yes, I can hear you well. I hope you can hear me okay.
Muchísimas gracias. Bueno, yo soy
Thank you so much. My name is Miriensi Gonzalez. I'm a facilitator of the Andes region. I'm part of the agroecological movement of the Americas and Latin and the Caribbean. I live in the northern part of the Cauca Valley. It is a city, which is a capital city, that from 6 o'clock in the morning, I've been having problems with my connectivity. So I don't only want to apologize for not being able to be in the meeting at the time I was meant to be at, but also I wanted to show you as an example of what we had to deal with in this negotiation process. For those of us who live in the city, who have all of the amenities and it's easy to access information communication technology, we don't even want to imagine how difficult it would be for those people that don't have these technologies. And in order to take part, they had to go to cities, to capitals, they had to travel. And even still, the agricultural model that is being imposed is this one. So I'm speaking on behalf of the hundreds of peasant organizations and peoples that in Latin America consider agroecology as a system of knowledge and principles, social, cultural, economic aspects in the territory and in communities. We base this on the recognition of the value that we give to peasant and indigenous knowledge, generating deep transformations from food systems, guaranteeing food sovereignty of peoples. We, in the territories, are throughout the continent of the Americas. The lifestyles are not only peasant, but also indigenous. Modernization in agribusiness is an expression of the extractivist model, which promotes mass use of chemical fertilizers and different agrotoxics. But furthermore, they also expel peasant families and indigenous families from their lands, taking over the resources and increasing and compounding the food and environmental crisis. We, as men, women, youth, who live and work with agroecology, for us it's something that is fundamental. In that document that was adopted and which underwent a number of negotiations, and my colleagues have mentioned this, it was done virtually. The time zones did not allow us to participate sufficiently. It was done in English, and in some occasions, we were able to have interpretation services. Not always. This process did not meet our expectations. The organizations that work with agroecology, we hoped for more recognition because this would be a comprehensive way of understanding our life in community. The adopted document supports monocrops. It ignores peasant and indigenous knowledge, and it also leads to the disappearance of diversified systems. We're going to lose biodiversity. We're going to destroy our soils and also contaminate water. This agriculture provokes the disappearance of forests and also supports the use of toxic chemicals. And even still, in the deliberation, some of the government's delegates claimed that they were not aware of climate change. Therefore, we think that it is important to drive a transition process towards agroecology, which is a creative and political process in the rural communities and peoples. We cannot allow agriculture to be focused on the market. Foods are not commodities, and they must be accessible as a right to everyone. We must generate spaces in public policy in favor of peasant farming, and water, seeds must be considered a common good so that it is not sold as a commodity. It is urgent to drive deep agrarian reform to guarantee access to land, and that this is in the hands of peasants. We must strengthen our original peoples and peasant communities. We, from agroecology, seek to strengthen the capacities of local communications in administering their own lands and in realizing food sovereignty. That is our commitment. In alliance with other movements, we drive a number of movements for social, economic, political, and cultural rights, and these are principles to build for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mirienzi, and I'm very happy that you could connect again with these important messages on the urgency to transform our food systems. Now, I would like to pass the floor to our last speaker today, Hala Barakat. Hala, over to you.
Thank you very much, Magdalena. Very happy to be among you today and to present the perspective of the women's group, the gender group. I am a member of a network in the Arab region for food sovereignty and affiliated to Habitat International Coalition. And I am a part of the coordinating committee of the CSM for the urban food insecure. I've been active within the working group on women, and but essentially I am an ecologist and a food researcher and a very, very small food producer in Egypt. So from a gender perspective, the document that we all have read and discussed has some issues that are important from a women's perspective and gender perspective. First and for all, the issue of the document not placing the protection and realization of human rights at its center. This is very, very important because apparently there was a resistance of some factors to the inclusion of women's rights in the policy documentation. And very especially in regions where basic human rights, such as right to food or women's rights, are not mainstream in laws and constitutions, there is a real need for the CFS to be a space where we can celebrate these rights, and also to have these the human rights influence all the CFS policy outcomes. It is essential. Why? Because when the human rights are not clear in the laws and constitutions, then the adoption of these guidelines is much more difficult. So if they are clear in a document, in the CFS document, then there is maybe a possibility for the adoption of the recommendations and guidelines. The second point is that there is a lack of clarity in what we would have liked to see as the central role of agroecology, or the potential of agroecology to transform our food systems. This is not very clear in the document. I will couple this with also a failure to recognize the traditional knowledge of indigenous and peasant people, but very particularly women. Because agroecology, as Perla mentioned earlier, is part and parcel of our food systems, particularly in regions where traditional food production systems are still in place. And this is where small food producers actually feed the world. And at least 40% of these small food producers are women. So agroecology and food sovereignty and seed sovereignty, they support and are essential for women's role in food production. But at the same time, they cannot also be undertaken without recognizing the role of women in saving and transmitting knowledge about how to produce food, knowledge about seeds and seed saving, about practices and food production and processing. The third point is that is this issue of power imbalance, especially within the food systems. It is one of the biggest problems of the current food system, of course, is that there is power and money in the hands of the corporate world, and they influence both the policy and also the market. This is not a very fair situation, but it's particularly flagrant in case of countries and regions where there is conflict, occupation, and protracted crises. The region where I come from, this is the everyday reality. And the policy document, recommendation document, which of course is about agroecology, so it has this agroecological approach, should at least acknowledge this imbalance in power between the various actors, very especially women in occupied territories. This would call for a document that would ask for a complete revision of public policies to include financial support and infrastructures that are tailored towards ratifying this imbalance. Ratifying this imbalance helps to promote and implement agroecology. So we actually have some expectations from the CFS. CFS is and must remain a space where there is a valorization and insistence on women's and gender's rights, and have these rights influence all the policy outcomes. The CFS must also be the space where we overcome the use of what we call agreed language or not acceptable terms, such as occupation, such as protracted crises. And also, we think that the fact that this is not really clearly happening is very worrying for us and also for the present and the future of the CFS. These points, we think, could be achieved if the CFS becomes the space where a real dialogue is created with the civil society representatives, a continuous dialogue and consultation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hala, for presenting the gender perspective and the importance of agroecology for women, and also a reflection for the future CFS processes. I would like also to take this opportunity before we jump into the question and answer sessions that we will be publishing a press release on our website, and the link to this press release will be now shared through the chat. So we invite you also to share this press release widely. Now, being it 2:50 p.m., I would like to take maybe 5 to 6 minutes for some questions from the floor. If you have any questions or comments, please do raise your hand. Emma, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. It's not a question, it's just to thank you for this transparent discussion. I'm thinking not only in the process we had this year, but of course the importance of the comments that you share with us for the next processes that are coming. So I think this is very useful to prepare ourselves for the next discussions we will have in CFS processes and other negotiations in the UN systems in general. So it's just to thank you for your comments.
Thank you so much, Emma, and thank you also for these encouraging words. We have time for 1 or 2 questions or comments more. Yes, please, Elsa.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. And I would like to thank you for inviting me to participate and listening carefully to your points of views and also incorporating them into our thinking here. My question is more related to I think it became clear all the issues that did not work well. And I would like to know if the civil society mechanism is developing any kind of action, sensitization at country level, in view to, because politics are done in Rome, but they're also, especially they are done in our countries. And the negotiating process is a result of the guidance received from country level. So I would be interested in knowing if there are any actions that you are also developing so that next negotiations could be easier. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this question. I see no other hands, so I would invite some of our speakers maybe to respond to this question, particularly maybe Hala, Perla, Tyler, or Mirienzi. If one of you would like to briefly answer this question, since you are very well connected to the realities at the national level. Tyler, please go ahead. You're on mute, Tyler.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just add, thank you so much for the question. The CSM, we have regional processes that we're trying to strengthen. This is one important way that we can improve the future processes as well as existing policy processes. And we also try and organize bilateral meetings with governments, but this has mostly been virtual. And so we request that governments respond to our requests for meetings and allow us to deeply engage in these discussions. So I'll leave it at that, pass it to others. Thanks.
Thanks, Tyler. I see Mirienzi also wants to complement. Mirienzi?
Sí, muchísimas gracias.
Yes, thank you very much, Magdalena. I would like to thank you for the question. In a very brief way, I would say that in the Andes region, we have been driving through a number of observatories in partnership with other organizations, and we participate in the Andes Seminar of Agroecology and Food Sovereignty. We've been very active in this regard. We have a lot of interactions with a number of organizations in consensus building for the drawing up of public policy in each of our countries. However, in the specific case of Colombia, we have two important battles. Legally, the first is for the recognition of the rights of peasants. Colombia has not accepted, let's say, it hasn't adopted in its public policy. We are promoting this, and this has been since about 2016, even before UN drop, the recognition of the subject of the peasant as a political subject. And we are currently involved in legislative debates on a bill which would recognize agroecology and food sovereignty. We already have a public policy document, and that is a resolution from 2017, which recognizes family, community, and peasant farming. However, we still have to make more progress on a public policy document on food sovereignty and agroecology, and very importantly, to recognize the peasants as subjects of law. Thank you.
So much for sharing what you are doing at the regional level, but also at the national level. I think this is also an important reflection for the participation within the CFS itself, from the CSM, but also from all CFS member states. We are now almost at 3 p.m. So having no other hands on the list, I would go ahead in closing this session and thanking you once again for being here with us today. And we hope that this session was informative, but also served as a source of reflection and inspiration for what's coming ahead in front of us within the CFS. So thank you so much, everyone. And I wish you a very good rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Muchísimas gracias. Adiós. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, interpreters. Thank you, Ambassador, for joining us as well.